we get the fullness of spiritual life? We need to add some more to Jesus. And this city had some interesting elements. Hierapolis and Laodicea, these other cities nearby, had become the new up-and-coming towns. They were the prominent ones, the big ones. They had the booming economies. They were the ones that there was new trade routes through. And Colossae became increasingly marginalized, or not as big or as prominent as these other cities. So you can imagine that's discouraging for the people there, because they're wondering, why is business changing, things being not as great. And then the city was prone to earthquakes, so it had been broken down and rebuilt over the years multiple times. And I think you can imagine, if you're in those shoes, where you could be someone who's wondering, is Jesus really enough for life? These other people it's going better for. We got this messy town, or things not as great, or we're not as important. Maybe we need more than just Jesus and this message we've heard about. Maybe there's more. So let's maybe mix and match and add some other things. Is Jesus really all we need for our spiritual needs? That's some of the stuff going on in their hearts and minds. And Paul writes this letter from prison, which is not a pretty place. He's not in some nice desk office writing something out. He's in prison, and he says, yes, Jesus is all you need. He's it. He's all you need. Jesus and his grace. And you don't graduate from it. It's not something that happened 18 years ago. You look back on it and say, oh, that's cute, and then you move on. No, this is it. It's the real deal. So last week we talked about and unpacked one of the most incredible passages in the New Testament about the identity of Jesus, Colossians 1:15-20, and we're going to read through it real quick because it sets us up where we're going today. He says this about Jesus. He is the image of the invisible God. He's the firstborn of all creation. By him all things were created in heaven and on earth, things that are visible and invisible. Thrones, dominions, rulers, authorities, all things were created through him and for him. He's before all things, and in him all things hold together. He's the head of the body, the church. He's the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things in heaven or on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. Did you catch it multiple times? It says all things, everything. He is the king of creation. He was there at the beginning, and he's the king of the new creation and the church, and he's the image of God. Now, human beings, we're made in the image of God too, right? To reflect him and represent him, and yet we're broken and marred, and he is the perfect image of God. And he ends in verse 19, the fullness of God was pleased to dwell in him. That Jesus was fully God, fully man, and through him to reconcile to himself all things. And we ended with this idea last week that Jesus is the creator, sustainer, and redeemer of everything and everyone. That's who he is. And this huge picture, this cosmic big picture, Paul never just does kind of abstract theology. He really always makes it personal. He says, and this is about you. And that's where we go this morning. He says this, all of it, it applies to you, to your life, to the Colossians, and to the people of Quest. So we're going to look at Colossians 1:21-23 this morning, just 3 verses, but there'll be a lot here, and we're going to read through it and then dive in. Paul then goes on, making peace or through the blood of his cross, and then he says, and you, who once were alienated and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds, he is now reconciled in his body of flesh by his death, in order to present you holy and blameless and above reproach before him. If indeed you continue in the faith, stable and steadfast, not shifting from the hope of the gospel that you've heard, which has been proclaimed in all creation under heaven, and of which I, Paul, became a minister, a servant. And when you take passage by passage, you kind of got to link them together and say, how does this fit in the flow of his argument, what he's saying? So we're going to put the previous last 2 verses about the reconciling work of God through the blood of Jesus, because that kind of hangs over what he says here. He says, in you, for the Colossians. And he's going to say 3 things. He's going to say, remember where you've come from. Look at where you're going. Remember where you're going. And therefore, it's going to motivate you to persevere in the present. He's going to talk about past, future, and present, and how those kind of ground our motivation, our spiritual life, to remember where we've come from, where we're going, to persevere in the present. So let's dive in the past. This is where he starts. And you, this is a new section, because he's made peace by the blood of the cross. Now he says it's you. Verses 21, to the Colossian people, you were once alienated, you were hostile in mind, you're doing evil deeds. This whole big cosmic rescue mission of Jesus, it's for you. You used to be alienated. You used to be an enemy of God, actually, separated. This is very, very personal. He talks about hostile in mind, doing evil deeds. You're alienated. They're separated relationally. They're not connected automatically. We don't have a vibrant spiritual life just by nature of being alive. We actually are separated from God. There's a distance there. And when he says hostile in mind, when we think mind, we tend to think that's the thinking part of our thoughts, our thought life, the intellectual world. And this word mind, hostile in mind, can refer to that kind of way of thinking, but it also talks about our disposition, our attitude, the way that we think. It's not just that you have bad thoughts. You actually have a broken internal spiritual system. You actually, each one of us, our modes of thinking, our hearts, our affections, the whole process, we're disposed, it's corrupt thoughts, a corrupted, misshaped, broken reality that comes from corrupt internal spiritual realities. And then he says that goes on, this is where you've come from, Colossians, to doing evil deeds, that broken, corrupted internal spiritual realities and broken, corrupted spiritual thoughts leads to broken, corrupted spiritual life, the way that we do, the actions that we live, the steps that we take. They're all tainted and affected by sin, and that then reinforces the corrupted ways that we think and do life, and it becomes this cycle where we end up in destructive places, and we end up in places where evil actually ends up being celebrated and normalized, and good things are no longer viewed as good. And we see that all over our culture, where there's a flip-flop of values of what is important, what's right and wrong, and evil is not just normal, but it's celebrated in all sorts of context. And so Paul's saying, this is the reality for human beings, apart from God, that we are alienated, hostile in mind, doing evil deeds. Remember where you came from, Colossians. Remember the life you've lived, where you've come from, your past plight. Now, this is a radical claim of our day and age. This is perhaps one of the biggest conflict zones with Christianity in our cultural moment, because it's saying human beings are broken. And we're not just broken, but we are rebellious. It's not just we're passively broken, like, oh, bummer. No, we've actively chosen in different ways, for every one of us, to go down paths against God, to run against the grain of the universe. And this is a fundamental conflict with our day and age, which says, hey, whatever you feel is true, that's true for you, and if you feel it, you need to act on it. That would be the only thing that would be wrong, is if you didn't act on it. Otherwise, you're not your authentic, true self. And you see how that plays out in every area of life, and it assumes everyone's feelings, everyone's internal reality determines what is true, and there's nothing wrong with whatever feelings or thoughts you may have. But the scriptures are really clear. Actually, there's maybe a broken mechanism in our heart, our mind. Not everything that comes out of us is good. In fact, we end up calloused. This is what Paul says in Ephesians 4, similarly, talking about alienation. 4:17, he says, "This I say and testify in the Lord, that you must no longer walk as the Gentiles, as the nations, in their futility of their minds. They're darkened in their understanding, alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to their hardness of heart. They become callous. They've given themselves up to sensuality, greedy, to practice every kind of impurity. But that is not the way that you learned Christ. That's not how you learned about Jesus. Assuming you have heard about him and were taught in him the truth that is in Jesus, to put off the old self which belongs to your former manner of life, corrupt through its deceitful desires, and to be renewed in the spirit of your minds, put on the new self, created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness." This is where you've come from. You are made in the image of God, but you are broken. But Jesus is the perfect image of God, and now you're being remade to look like Jesus, to reflect God and represent God. If you're looking for some just good, positive nighttime reading about sin, I want to encourage you to read this book. It's by a guy named Cornelius Plantinga Jr., and it's called Not the Way It's Supposed to Be. It's the best book on sin. It's so good. I say that with a smile on my face. It was really good. It has just a couple thoughts that kind of, I think, paint a picture for what the reality of Paul is saying here about brokenness. He says, God hates sin, not just because it violates his law, but more substantively, because it violates shalom, peace, human flourishing, because it breaks the peace, because it interferes with the way things are supposed to be. It means God made the world a certain way, and he's not just some arbitrary buzzkill or party pooper saying, stop having fun, stop doing those things. That's not who God is. He actually made the world a certain way, and when we corrupt the world, or when we say, no, we're going to do things our way, we end up running against the grain of the universe, and there's consequences to it, and it breaks his heart. It's not arbitrary. God actually loves this world, created about this world. He wants justice and life and flourishing, and that's why God hates sin. It's not just because he doesn't want you to have fun. He actually cares deeply about the path that we go on. Another quote is, sin hurts other people and grieves God, but it also corrodes us. Sin is a form of self-abuse. There is a sense in which sin it harms other people, and it also shapes you. And it will, if you don't kill sin, it will kill you. It will shape you. It will hurt others, grieve God, break his heart, and corrode us. The last quote from him, he says, perversion, this meaning what's upside down, it's an ends and purposes disease. Most broadly understood, perversion is the turning of loyalty and energy and desire away from God and to God's project in the world, and it is the diversion of construction materials for the city of God to side projects of our own, often accompanied by jerry-built ideologies that seek to justify the diversion. God made us to build a certain type of world, to participate in his work of creating and working and building and representing him, and we flip it. We turn our energy, our abilities, our talents, our resources, and we turn them towards our own side projects of self, of life, in all sorts of ways. And underneath it, there's jerry-built ideologies, ways of thinking that are just barely hanging together by duct tape that actually won't be able, they're not strong enough, they're flimsy. They're not going to hold up throughout the reality of life. And we seek to kind of justify why we go down those paths. That's what happens with sin. We turn from what God has for us, and we have shifted it, and we live life for ourselves, and that ends up against God. That's this alienation. And I think it breaks God's heart that there's a disconnect between his creation and how we've turned from him. And Paul's saying, remember, that's where you've come from. Every one of us, that's where you come from. You're not better than anyone else. You come from this too. Remember your past plight. In verse 22, he gives a positive. He says, he has now reconciled in his body of flesh by his death. He has now reconciled in his body of flesh by his death. He's reconciled us, which we saw first in verse 20 in the black box at the top, that he is reconciling all things by the blood of his cross, and that includes you and me now. And literally, it says, but now he has reconciled in Greek, but they didn't translate the but, otherwise we would have circled it. But now, it's a new thing. He has reconciled you. He has reconciled you. Remember back in chapter 1, verse 13 and 14, he says, he has delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. He assumes this is a prominent defining reality for the Colossian church, that they have been transferred out of one domain, one kingdom, into a new domain, a new kingdom where there's redemption, forgiveness of sins in his beloved Son. That's where they've been, and that's where they are now. So it makes you wonder, have we really forgotten and grown numb to how amazing grace is? Can we sing Amazing Grace and lose kind of a sense of awe, to be numb to how amazing this is? Paul's saying, don't forget where you have come from. The resolution to our spiritual alienation can only happen through Jesus. You don't need Jesus plus anything else. It's only through him. And he says it's in Jesus' body of flesh, which is an interesting way of saying it, because he could have just said, this has happened in Jesus' body, because he came in a physical body. And he says, no, a body of flesh, to really accentuate Jesus physically came. It's not just any body, it's a body of flesh. He was flesh and blood. We touched him, we saw him. He was physically there. And this word body often means physicality in its weakness or potential for corruption or subject to mortal limitations. He's saying Jesus, fully human, fully God, came. He's emphasizing the humanity of Jesus here. There's a quote from Guthrie, which is kind of summarizing it, says this about Jesus. Jesus is not like a king who preserves his majesty and honor only by shutting himself up in the splendor of his palace, safely isolated from the misery of the poor peasants and threats of his enemies outside the fortress. His majesty is the majesty of a love so great that he leaves the palace and his royal trappings to live among his subjects as one of them, sharing their condition even at the risk of vulnerability to the attack of his enemies. And if we want to find this king, we will find him among the weak and lowly, his genuine majesty, both revealed and hidden, in his choosing to share their vulnerability, suffering, guilt, and powerlessness. That's how majestic his majesty is, of his love, that he leaves the comforts of a throne room and the safety and security of not being attacked to join the peasants, to join the people who need him, to fight for them, and to be vulnerable and to suffer. That's what Paul's saying, that Jesus has done by reconciling us in his body of flesh. He's making peace by bearing the wrath of God for us and physically rising from the dead to conquer our greatest physical threat and greatest spiritual threat, death. That's our greatest enemy. And then he says, verse 22, there's a purpose to all of this, a purpose. It's in order to present you holy and blameless and above reproach before him. It's all for this, to present you, to hold you up before him, holy, blameless, above reproach. And this word present can mean to like step before, put on a stand, but it's also a word that's used to present someone before a judge, to a judgment seat. So in Romans 14:10, Paul says this, for we will all stand before the judgment seat of God. This word stand before is the same word, that God, it's in order to present you holy and blameless and above reproach before him. And I think that's the idea here, is that we're going to be set before the judge, holy, blameless, above reproach. These three things. Holy, it's the same word saints, to say every one of us is a saint. You are set apart. You are holy. You are cleansed and dedicated to God. There's a present dimension to that, of being holy and being a saint. And there's a future dimension to that, where it's a place you are going, because we're all works in progress. We're not complete. And we're set apart for it. And then Paul says, so you live your life in alignment to this deeper spiritual reality. You become who you really are by becoming holy more and more in a process. And then he says blameless. It means unblemished, morally pure, and it's a word often used to speak about animal sacrifices, pure sacrifices that they needed, which were symbolic to point to our need for a perfect sacrifice, which Jesus was. And he says, you're going to be blameless. I don't know about you, but I don't feel very blameless all the time. I can think of lots of things to hold against myself or feel accused for doing, which we all carry, shame and guilt. And he says, you're going to be presented above reproach, irreproachable. The enemy cannot come and point to that thing and say, that disqualifies you from being here. You're not allowed. You are not in his presence. You're above reproach. And these three concepts, they kind of overlap, right? Blameless and above reproach. And I think they overlap because Paul's kind of piling on terms to give a grand picture of saying, look at where you're going. Your future standing. This is your future. That you came from the alienation. This is where you're going, to the future before him, holy, blameless, above reproach before him. And that's where when he says, it makes you think, well, when do we stand before God? When do we stand and give an account? It's when he returns, when there's a judgment and a new heavens, new earth, and all of that at the end of time. So I think this is a future dimension and saying, this is where you're going. So when you look backwards out of your rearview mirror in your car, it's helpful. It reminds you where you have come from. And you also, it's not the same as a windshield to know this is the direction I'm headed. This is where I'm going. You have to look through a windshield, and that's what Paul's doing here. And it's sort of like, I think, what the Patriots are going to need to do today, to look backwards. They're going to need to look backwards and to remind themselves that they haven't won enough to motivate their future victory today. Yeah, I went there. Yesterday afternoon, I was like, who's in the big game? And so we looked it up. And Krista cheers for the underdogs, and I like to rile people up, so go Patriots. All right, look to where you are going and your future standing, the mirror and the windshield. Look to where you're going. The purpose of all of this is reconciling, bringing back together, that's a relational word, a friendship with God. He wants you to be with him, brand new, blameless, above reproach in this amazing existence that the enemy cannot disqualify you from. Paul then moves from the future to the present, to then say all of this actually does matter for how you live here and now in verse 23. All of this, if indeed you continue in the faith, stable and steadfast, not shifting from the hope of the gospel that you've heard. And it's a gospel that's been proclaimed in all creation under heaven, which I, Paul, am a minister. He says, continue in the faith. Keep pursuing, keep persevering, keep chasing after this, keep at it. And this is a warning where he brings truth and grace together. You've been rescued. There's grace, there is love, there's a beautiful place where you're going. But the truth is you were broken, you were sinful, you needed brought back, and you need to persevere. He puts truth and grace together. It's not harsh and it's not wimpy. It's both together. It's truth and grace. It's love. If you continue in the faith, align your life, the way you live now, with Christ and what this new spiritual reality means before him. And when he says, if indeed you continue, that maybe when you read it, you're like, that sounds questionable. Like Paul's kind of wondering, I don't know if you can do this. If you can, you'll make it to the end. But actually, the way the Greek here is constructed, he's saying that this is a necessary, it's not questioning their ability, it's stating this is the condition. If you do this, this is the road that it's headed on. You need to stay faithful, persevering, present here and now. If you want to be holy before God now, it means there is a life of pursuing, cultivating holiness here and now. So I think he's saying, if you continue in the faith, kind of parentheses, and I think you will. I know you will. Because remember back in chapter 1 when he said, God has transferred you from the kingdom of darkness to kingdom of light. I think it's a spiritual reality that he believes is true for them, for those with genuine faith. And he says here that you'll be stable, steadfast, not shifting from the hope of the gospel. Stable, this is a Greek word that literally translated would mean having been established, having been grounded and founded. It's about something in the past that has happened that has present implications, that you have a firm foundation. We just sang about. You have a firm foundation. You are stable. You are steadfast. It's firm. And that's what grounds your perseverance, your steps daily through life. It's about this location and steadfastness that comes from grounding in Jesus. And as they faced false teaching and other ideologies and different things that they were struggling through spiritually, he is saying, this is the foundation. Jesus is all you need. You don't need Jesus plus X, Y, or Z. It's just that. So persevere in the present. Live out this present identity you have, steady as a follower of Jesus in faith. And your faith is not passive. This is something you have to put effort to. It's not a get out of jail free card that you checked a box and now you're free to do whatever and then it's all covered. It means we don't understand the gospel if that's the way we live. There is a present perseverance of living out our identity. And he says it's the hope of the gospel. That means hope that comes from the gospel. It's generated by the gospel. And this word hope doesn't mean wishful thinking, like I hope it's sunny this week and I hope the Seahawks lose, and I hope, those are wishful thinking things, and the Bible word is a surety. You're shaking your head about the Seahawks thing or the Jesus part? The Seahawks thing, yeah. This is, A hope, it means an assurance, it's a confidence. Like you actually believe that this is a reality. It is the hope of the gospel. So is it easier to bounce on a boat in rocky seas or a bouncy house and to try to stand, or on a firm concrete foundation that you can stand on? And he's saying that's the gospel. It's not the bouncy house where you're wobbling. That would be trying to, put your hope in your good behavior. It doesn't work. That doesn't sustain us enough to persevere. We have the concrete of the gospel. And then he closes by describing a few things about the gospel he says it's been, which you've heard. Epaphras was the one who came and announced the good news, the gospel, that Jesus died for them, rose for them, the good news. They've heard it. And then he says it's been proclaimed in all creation under heaven, which is a unique statement because this is within 30 years of Jesus' death and resurrection. Within 30 years, he says the gospel has been proclaimed to everything under heaven. Is that a hyperbole? Like, in a sense, it's just an exaggeration because it's spread through the whole Roman Empire by this point. It's spread to the whole known world. That's a possibility. Just geographically, there's a sense in which it had spread to the core known world. Or is it saying to all sorts of people that it's been proclaimed to them? Or is it about the cosmic proclamation? It's been to everything, all the spiritual realities of our world, to address some of the spiritual things of their context? Or does proclaimed in all creation, does it mean that the gospel is not obscure? It's not a mystery. It's out there in the world. It is public truth. It's public ideas. It could mean that. Or it could be anticipatory. In other words, Jesus has started this mission to reach the world, to reach the nations, and in principle, it has been preached to the world and the nations. N.T. Wright says it's like when a king makes a proclamation and sends it off to distant lands. In a sense, it has been proclaimed, even if it hasn't reached every single nook and cranny of the world. It has been proclaimed, and we are his messengers scurrying around. And I think it could be that. But however you kind of understand what exactly that means, Paul's emphasis, though, is on this world. It's not some heavenly spirit, far-off reality of kind of over-spiritualizing things. He says the mission is here and now. It's a gospel going out in the world. And then he says, lastly, that it's of which I, Paul, became a minister, a servant, a humble servant. It's fascinating because he could play the boss card and say, I've seen Jesus. I've studied theology. I've done all these things. You know me as an apostle. And he just says, I'm a servant. That's all I am. I'm a servant. So regardless how you kind of understand what exactly it means, the emphasis on the earthly mission, I think, which is about the incarnation too, that God came in the flesh to redeem this world, and God's redemptive work is moving forward. So that's what you can see where he says, so don't forget where you've come from, who you are, where you're headed. So persevere. You should be motivated in the present to take the next steps. So past, future, and present here in this very, I think, personal, you can kind of read it in 10 seconds to these three verses, but there's a lot there to see how he connects the gospel to their present day. So therefore, what now? A couple thoughts for us. First, he says, remember your past plight. Remember where you have come from. You needed God's grace and truth. So first, if you forget grace, if you forget your need for grace, you're going to become arrogant and mean-spirited and judgmental, and you're not going to extend grace to others. If you forget that you needed grace, it's going to malform your heart. You need to remember grace that you've received. And then he says also, if we forget our need for truth, then we lose our vision of truth for others. It's both grace and truth together. Because grace without truth is meaningless. It doesn't matter if there's no such thing as right or wrong. You don't need grace. We're just trying to be kind. And kindness is important, but you hold grace and truth together. And first and foremost, evaluating for yourself, and then that helps you as you navigate that in our world. So we have to take a look at ourselves. Remember those Plantico quotes about sin, about turning our loyalty and energy and desires from God and from his project in the world to our own construction projects. He's saying, don't do that. Remember where you've come from and what you live for now. Don't give your life, don't give all your stuff just for self or for your own side projects. So if you have amazing skills and abilities, but you're using them to promote yourself, then he's saying you got to serve others. It's truth and grace together. Remember where you've come from and what you're building your life with. Secondly, embrace your future hope. Remember your future. Sounds weird to say. Remember, it's past. But remember your future, where you can envision the world where you're headed, holy and blameless before him. So first, this breaks the cycle of shame. This is one of the strongest experiences of human reality is shame. Not just that I've done something wrong and I'm guilty. We all feel that, and we should feel that. But a sense of, I'm not just guilty, but there's something wrong with me. Not just I've done something wrong, but I am wrong. And you start to go into identity world of how worthless or valueless or whatever because of not just things that you have done, but the things that have happened to you, and it becomes this dark, dark spiral of shame. And the voice of the accuser to say, that's unforgivable, you're unlovable, you're whatever. Those are not the way that God speaks to his children. You should feel conviction. God convicts, but he's not going to shame you in this sort of way. So this breaks the cycle of shame when you say, that's where I'm headed, I'm wholly blameless above reproach in that day. And so you remember where your hope is found. It's not on your performance or your failures or your good behavior or any of that. It's remembering that it's grounded in the gospel, the concrete that we stand on, that Jesus, we are in Christ, we are forgiven, made new, and there's a day when that'll be completed, and that God will bring that about. And if you're looking for maybe just exploring that idea of shame, there's a great book called The Soul of Shame by Kurt Thompson. It's well worth diving to. So that's your future hope. And then persevere in the present. Persevere in the present. First, your spiritual life, it's always dynamic rather than static. We're either growing bigger or it's shrinking and being twisted. It's never just staying the same. And that's just part of life. So he's saying, don't be nonchalant about your responsibilities for your spiritual life. There is a perseverance you need to do in the present to continue in the faith. Continue in the faith. Don't get lost in all the ideologies of the day and mix and match them in a way that you cloud Jesus out. Your spiritual life, you need to recognize this is something dynamic, it's living, I need to invest in it. And then to ask the next question, to say, what's the next step? What's the next step for me? To keep moving forward. And maybe to get into God's word, you just say, I'm going to read the verse of the day, or I'm going to try to read a chapter, or I'm going to meet with a wiser Christian than I, or I'm new to this, and I need some help. I don't even know where to begin. Or maybe you're struggling with some sin, and the shame piece is really strong, and you just need to call someone and say, I'm struggling with this, I need your help. Maybe it's doubts that you have, and you need to engage the doubts and the questions, because doubts are normal about faith and questions, and to just say, okay, I'm going to keep exploring rather than dismiss it and walk away from this thing. Just what's the next step for you? Just small. What's the next right step? And persevere. And perseverance is not perfection. It's not get it together. It's being perfectible, one step at a time. All right, I'm going to invite the band up, and we, at the end of each message so far in our series, we've tried to put it in our own words a little bit to kind of summarize the ideas and put it in kind of our own thoughts to get the thread of where Paul is going in this letter. And we said last week that Jesus was the creator, sustainer, redeemer of everything and everyone for all who turn to him, right? Verses 15 to 20. So building off that, we have this week. If Jesus is the sustainer and redeemer of the universe, how cosmic and big it was last week, then Jesus can sustain and redeem you. If he's that big, he can do it for you, to sustain and redeem you. So hold on to him. Hold on to him. Persevere. Don't lose sight of him. Don't try to add more to him. Jesus is enough. So hold on to him. With that, let's pray. Lord, we come to you, needing to persevere, needing your grace and your truth and your spirit to enable us. So, Lord, remind us where we've come from and where we're headed so that we can be motivated in each moment to take the next right step and persevere and walk with you. In your name we pray. Amen.
Please stand with us as we sing this last song.
Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are, and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me.
Worthy of every song.
Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are, and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. I will build my life. I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation. I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken. I will build my life upon your love. It
So you don't go alone, you go together, you go with each other. So as you leave, turn to your neighbor, say, I am glad to have you here. Your hair looks nice. Give them a hug, and have a great afternoon, and come back next Sunday to worship and dive in. Go in peace.